Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar, where we'll again be teaching on the teachings of Dascalos and the Researchers of Truth. And tonight we're going to roll back time to the very beginning of man coming to the planet. But before we do that, let's say our prayer, our beginning prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our transgressions, as we forgive those who transgress against us. And lead us while in temptation, and deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Absolute, infinite beingness, God, everlasting life, love, and mercy, manifesting yourself in yourself as the total wisdom and the almightiness. Enlighten our minds to understand you as the truth. Clean our hearts to reflect your love toward you and toward all other human beings. Amen. And Aki is here with us tonight. She's here with me presenting the webinar, and she'll be given a special meditation called the Divine Umbilical Cord, which is on the spark of life that we're going to be talking about tonight. I myself, and I know the researchers of group here that we serve together, are very blessed by Aki's good works, and we're looking forward to the meditation tonight. Now, from the beginning of humans coming to the planet, we searched to understand our identity through religions, through philosophies, through spiritual systems. We actually never stopped seeking the truth of who we are, what we are, where we've come from, why are we here, and where are we going? In fact, these 5 basic questions has driven humans to raise their consciousness from the instinctual level of consciousness expressed by the early cavemen to the subconsciousness typified by today's consumer society, and on to awakening consciousness, to superconscious, and finally to self superconsciousness, which is true self-realization. And from the beginning, our search relied on the impressions and perceptions we received through the 5 senses, all processed by the material brain through the filter of self-awareness. And there are so many different kinds of self-awarenesses. How many kinds? As many as there are people on the planet. And as marvelous as the brain and the 5 senses are, they are too limited to perceive the true greatness of a human being. This thirst to know the truth is what drove human beings to wonder, to start to contemplate, to start to meditate on their own identity, on their origin, on the forms of life all around them, on their environment, and on 1,000 million questions about life, death, and love. Now, all through this process, the divine spirit ray was giving them life. It moved within all human beings, and it moved all human beings to slowly raise their consciousness and uplift their awareness and start their return to their real self and source. And ultimately, these two are the same. So looking around, humans saw different forms of life, the animals, and some imagined that human beings had evolved from animals, that we were just an upgraded version of an animal, as if we were ape 2.0, or a naked ape, as some call it. Of course, the material bodies of man and animals are very, very similar. Hair, flesh, bone, and blood, nerves and brains, even the chromosomes. But human beings are something much, much greater than the animals. Now, the main difference is that human beings can use the mind directly to think and contemplate. They can pose questions and provide answers. And they can and do change the way they are living a lot. Over time, no animal has ever changed their way of life. An ape today behaves like an ape did millions of years ago. Now, animals are not an extension of life. Their life is the breath of life given to them by the archangels. Their use of mind is limited to the instinctual consciousness, again, given to them by the archangels. They can't think for themselves. They don't even have a self. No dog ever thought, I'm Rover. However, human beings are an extension of life, divine life. In nature, in the highest nature, we are life. In nature, we have the characteristic of our source in quality, but not in quantity. In expression as a human being, we are invigorated by life, the divine life. But until self-realization, we are not giving a full expression of life. And by divine right, we have the ability to use the mind to think. Now, this alone should prove humans do not have an animal origin. This alone should prove humans are an entirely different creation. This alone should prove that humans have a divine origin, that we are all sons and daughters of God. And so it began, with humans as a separate creation from the animals. But the first humans on earth were cavemen and cavewomen. And by this, I mean they were human beings living in caves, not animals like the early primates. But in the beginning, they behaved exactly like animals. And sometimes they behaved worse than animals because initially, some were cannibalistic, just eating each other in order to survive, trying to survive in such a hostile world, trying to survive by just obeying their primitive urges and satisfying very, very strong emotion. Now, the environment they lived in was absolutely terrifying. At that time, there were lots of volcanoes erupting, persistent earthquakes shook the ground under their feet, killing many people. And the smoke and gas from the millions of volcanoes on Earth at that time created a suffocating atmosphere. Humans had to live in caves they could defend just to escape large carnivorous beasts who tried to eat them. So you see, both cavemen and cavewomen had to carry clubs to protect themselves from being eaten and also to kill small animals to eat, just to survive. Life was a pandemonium for the early humans. In Lemuria, these were living in Lemuria and elsewhere. Now, under such conditions, the caveman and cavewoman needed protection. They felt the need of believing in some entity, something greater than them, some power greater than themselves. And they did that just to inspire the courage in them to face the dangers in their life. And so they created gods, and they worshiped these gods. They made gods of powers in nature they saw all around them. The lightning, the fire, the rain, the sun. They made gods of animal forms all around them. The bear was the first animal power they worshiped. They also worshiped lions, serpents, birds, and they gave the human form to some of their gods. All this they did from necessity, just to feel protected and helped. But they were anthropomorphic gods. It was really the people attributing human traits to their gods. And yet they did really get help from these gods, which of course were only man-made elementals, thought forms they created and empowered, non-physical entities given an existence by humans. And the more people worshiped these gods, they gained more and more strength. They were imbued with the intelligence of those who created them. And because of the focused energy given to these gods by lots of people over time, they became stronger than the individuals who gave them their power and life. And they became very active. They affected their worshipers. But because no one's energized most of these gods anymore, those elemental gods of early man are inactive today. Once they were worshipped, but not anymore. So they have become de-energized. Now, this is probably the reason some skeptical people believe there is no God. Because it's easy to see in the past, it was mankind who made those gods and gave them human attributes. But they also gave them bad human attributes, such as prejudice, desire, fighting, revengefulness. We see this in the ancient gods of Egyptians, the Atlanteans, the Hindus, the Greeks, the Mayans, the Aztecs. Even the Old Testament Jewish God was an angry, jealous God who took revenge. Those people at that time had these negative qualities in them. So they imagined their gods must have them too. Seeing such human weaknesses ascribed to God, it can be hard for a thinking person to believe in God. It is obvious that man made these gods in their own image. The researcher of truth admits to this. But a researcher of truth or a real thinking person must not stop there. We have to reason further. Obviously, if man made these gods in the past, then these gods could not have made man. Just as obvious, humans did not make themselves. Do you feel like you made yourself? Did you give yourself the ability to think and feel? No. Okay, if man made all these false gods, then who made man? There comes a time in everyone's life, sooner or later, maybe not this lifetime, but in one lifetime, there comes a time where the worldly attractions and possessions and accomplishments stop enticing us so much. No matter how great they may seem in the moment, they do not really satisfy us for very long. Just as quickly as we achieve them, they lose their charm, and we start desiring other things. At other times, we sense we are something much greater than our own personality with fluctuating strengths and weaknesses and desires. And we get a glimpse of something much higher, much steadier, just beyond our constantly changing personality. It is in these kinds of experience that often starts you on your search, a search to find that mysterious inner self of yours. Or maybe your search begins when you're in great suffering, mentally, emotionally, physically, and you seek to be free from pain, unhappiness, or sorrow. So what should we seek to be free? Well, we're advised to seek the truth, and the truth will set us free. Free from what? Free from all these sufferings. That's the point. And all these sufferings are always born out of the darkness of ignorance. And so the search begins to find the light of truth. And at first, that search may launch us on the guru hunt. So we seek the light of truth outside ourselves in another human being. Nothing wrong with that initially. To find our way, at some point, we must seek guidance from somebody we trust, a trustworthy source. But even a trustworthy source, we don't blindly accept what they say without testing it and proving the truth for ourselves. But even that's not a replacement for you finding the truth. We are urged to seek the truth for ourselves. The advice is not to believe what others tell us the truth is and follow that blindly. In listening to a reliable source who's gone further than we have, we are still required to use reason to verify the truth of it. But even after we reach some truth and we find a higher relative of truth than we know before, that's not enough. Because we now must put that truth into action, into practice in our daily lives. We must prove the truth we find ourselves by practicing it. Just following along with the lessons with our thought, reading books, just thinking about it is not enough. Just finding higher truth and believing it without putting it into practice really doesn't help us that much. It's just like collecting bits of truth and knowledge and being able to recite that knowledge, that theoretical knowledge, won't set you free. Simply using your mind as thought does not lead to the experience of truth, which is what we're really seeking. We must turn that theoretical knowledge into experiential knowledge, but by putting it to the test and proving the truth of it in our own lives. Theoretical knowledge you can lose, forget, or be convinced otherwise. But knowledge we test and prove for ourselves becomes experiential knowledge, which you can't lose, and it cannot be taken from you. So this is a real aim of our spiritual search, to experience the truth of the teachings for ourselves. As seekers of truth, having our own personal experiences, we gain real knowledge about the reality we find ourselves in. And this means the material world and our psychological world, the world of our thoughts, emotions, and desires. These are worlds at very best of relative truth. And we cannot reach the absolute truth just living in these worlds. We must proceed gradually from a relative truth to a higher relative truth and higher levels of relative truth toward the absolute truth. To proceed up this ladder of relative truth, we use the keys of observation, concentration, introspection, meditation, and visualization, and others, and we use them to quiet the storms that sometimes rage within our personality. Training in meditation and visualization over time raises the small self-consciousness of the personality. It uplifts its little awareness, and this eventually leads to real self-realization. But real self-realization does not fully come forward until the complete elimination of our egoism. Then the inner self freely expresses itself, unencumbered by the 12 phases of egoism. The spiritual horizon before us is very, very broad and expansive, but it needs work. Spiritual unfoldment, spiritual gain is not just given to some and not others. Self-realization doesn't just drop from the sky in our laps. It takes work, lots of work. But it's the most rewarding work you can find, from my experience. But which way shall we work? How do we work? What way? Well, we have two ways. One we can simply call self-development, learning, knowing just for your own sake, uplifting your own personality self-awareness to higher levels. And this is good. This is the advice of Christ. Seek the truth, and the truth will set you free from evils and dangers and problems in life. The second way we work is in service to others. The enlightened masters from all times and in all places have spoken of this way. In this way of service, we give God's love and our love to others to help ease their suffering, mental suffering, emotional suffering, physical suffering. This is the way of a psychotherapist and a social worker. Even if you don't call yourself a psychotherapist or a social worker, you can be of help in so many, many ways. The need for this kind of work is great, but the workers are few by comparison. To be a good psychotherapist or just to really help someone, first you must really care about that person. You must love them. Approach them as a friend, not as a professional psychotherapist. If you do that, that will engender trust, and they will be open to your help. So really what this means, what this is telling us, is that real psychotherapy is a work of mercy. It's a work of mercy because it relieves the burden of suffering from the others. Now, both of these ways, self-development and service, are all good in our own aid in our own spiritual unfoldment to the point of self-realization. Yet both of these ways need training. Interestingly, the training for both is exactly the same. Practicing the right kind of meditation. Develop steady concentration in yourself. Cultivate your divine power of observation. And make real creative visualizations using the imprint of ether to construct beneficial elementals for ourselves and others. The other one is introspection, which is a self-analysis which leads to a truer conception about our outer and inner self. Now, of course, we don't have two selves. We have one self with 2 points, the inner and the outer. But in most people, these are all mixed up and entangled. So introspection is such a vital process because it's the process which helps us disentangle these two. And it's with the 5 keys that a seeker can work to reach the relative truth concerning their material life. And by studying what they are as a personality self, they become free of the unreasonable desires, troubling emotions, and disturbing thoughts, and false impressions associated with life on earth. In every nation, everywhere on the planet, there's conflict, there's violence, and there's bloodshed. People on earth are living in various degrees of confusion under multiple layers of ignorance. We all face these things every day in our life. Our work, or our duty, if you want to call it that, is first to wake up from all this, and then try, by our own example, to help others. To help them what? To help them wake up and see the true reality of life. This takes effort on our part. And it takes, again, these 5 keys. That's what's called them golden keys. They are. To overcome the difficulties we face and free ourselves from these confusions. Using these 5 keys, you need your real willpower to use them. Just knowing them isn't enough. You need willpower to use them. And those two together, the keys and your willpower, will help unfold your spirituality in your present day personality, raising your consciousness and uplifting your awareness, eventually assimilating the outer personality self to the inner self. So we have the way of self-development and the way of service. Follow one, or follow both ways if you can. God will bless your work, I guarantee it. Keeping our direction and the 2 ways we work in mind, we must also qualify ourselves to do this work. And what's the first and foremost qualification of a researcher of truth or seeker of truth? Love. Just love. Love to God and love to all other human beings. No exception. Love to God, the supreme selfhood, who is the source of our selfhood. Love to human beings, we are advised to love them as our own self, not less, not more, but exactly as we love ourselves, because in truth, they are ourselves. There is no them, there's only us. And we've talked about this in the past, about the purpose of our search. And one prime one is obviously self-realization, which is the realization of ourself, the little self, as the big self, the inner self. And to that aim, we initially study the truth concerning life and the forms of life on earth all around us. And eventually, we're going to raise our consciousness to even higher levels. And then we can start studying the truth concerning the higher planes, the psychical planes of the 4th dimension. And progressing further, we'll be able to express ourselves consciously there. Raising our consciousness to even higher levels, we will find the truth concerning life in the still higher noetical planes, the world of the 5th dimension. Extending our consciousness higher and higher levels, we find there's life in all these higher levels, better forms of life, more abundant forms of life. All these worlds and all the life forms in them have been created by the Logos and the Holy Spirit and the archangelic orders known as the Builders. All life forms in these worlds are given their life by the archangels. As I said, they give their breath of life to these forms. But the forms of life are not life itself. The forms of life come and go. The forms of life are short-lived materializations of the breath of life given by the archangels. But the pulse of life in human beings is our spirit soul self, part of our divine nature. Our divine nature, of course, is life itself. But metaphorically, we can say that this spark of life is the heart of our personality that has been dressed by our personality's elementals. And I mean the thoughts, desires, and feelings. And they obscure the pulse of life to whatever degree. The lower, the darker your thoughts and feelings are, the more that pulse of life is obscured. The cleaner, the brighter, the more that pulse of life can brilliantly shine through you. But even though the pulse of life, that spark in us, that divine spark in us, has been covered over with these lesser emotions and thoughts, that never affects the pulse of life itself. So we can say this spark of life literally is what's making our physical heart beat. Our heartbeats are obviously not made by us as a personality. If it was up to us to remember to make our heartbeats, we would have all died probably. This pulse of life is coming through the etheric counterpart of our physical heart, and it acts like an etheric pump, which pumps kinetic energy, distributes kinetic energy throughout our body, giving it life, energizing it. So the life in these higher worlds and the life in these higher worlds is supervised by the Holy Spirit and the archangels. And the higher you ascend in those worlds, the greater the light and the more beautiful experiences you'll have. But to reach those worlds, we do have to remove our obstacles. We must cast off the sandbags of our personality to raise high enough to reach these worlds. Dusko has described these worlds so beautifully, but without dropping our baggage, we just can't enter those worlds. You know, sometimes it's I get an image like, have you ever seen anybody carry a big bundle of long things in their arm? They try to go through a doorway. They can't go through it. They have to put the thing down to get through the doorway. They put down their baggage to get through the doorway. And that's the way it is spiritually. So the sandbags, of course, are our lower negative thoughts, emotions, intentions, desires, our unhealthy behaviors, all of which have their roots in egoism. This means the greatest obstacle to us is our personal egotism, which must be decreased and eventually completely eliminated. Then we can experience the reality of our inner self and can express ourselves consciously in all three worlds of existence: material, psychical, and noetical. We are free to research the truth found anywhere, but we must approach our search with caution and reason, because there are dangers. Truth can be found in any sincere spiritual system, but mistakes, falsehoods, and even poisons can be found in these systems as well. They've made their way into all spiritual systems. Now, these are the fanciful notions, the wishful thinking, the suffocating dogma, and religious prejudice. So we ourselves, we can't allow others to tell us what it is. We must use reason to discern these dangers. And all through our search, we must keep an open mind, but should not just believe and accept what people and systems say, because others do. There are no restrictions in searching the truth, and our development is boundless, completely boundless. Now let's try to take some questions here. Somebody asked, by the way, you can ask these questions anonymously. I know nobody's going to know who's asking. This question says, I'm confused about the obstacles. Are they made by us? Absolutely. Absolutely made by us. And how are they made by us? By egotistic expressions, self-centered behaviors. That's why I keep saying the greatest obstacle is our own egoism. We have, I don't know how to say it, it's like egoism has, well, I said at the beginning, 12 faces. These are the labors of Hercules and the practice on the symbol of life we talk about. Unbridled desires, anger, all these things are just different faces of the egotism. And the egoism itself is like a grand sum total of the collection of all these egoistic expressions. It's like it's a monster. It's a real monster. It's hiding in us. It's hiding in us so much. Because if as we wake up, we're going to find out it's not us. It's trying to convince us it's us. It has been trying to convince us of that our whole life. And we've believed it. Society has told us, yep, that's you. But as you start on this spiritual fast, if in any sincere spiritual system, will tell you, you have to get rid of the faces of egoism. And I'm telling you, they don't go away easy, because egoism is an entity. It's not a being. It's an entity we have created, and that makes us responsible for us. But as with any entity, its prime objective is self-survival. So if you think about, oh, I'm going to get rid of my egoism, it heard that. And it starts to make plans against you. It works against you. It takes a long time to catch it. A long time to catch it. And so these obstacles that are being done in front of, they're being created by the egotism, can be all kinds of things. They can be the most prettiest lies you've ever heard. And some people, the egotism tricks them because they tell them pretty lies. They tell them how great they are, or how good they're doing, or things like that. Then the other side, the egotism is masochistic. It's bipolar, really. It's got a part that really wants to say, oh, I'm so great. But then it just as quickly, it makes you feel bad about yourself because you're identified with it. It's really saying something to just keep you entangled, whether it's a praise or, oh, guilty feelings, oh, look what a bad boy am I. Both of those are egotism, and they keep you trapped. They hold you back. They are real obstacles. Now, somebody's asking to say what the 5 keys are again. The reason we call them keys, Dasklos calls them golden keys to the kingdom of heaven. And the reason he does is because Christ said to his disciples, I give you the keys to the kingdoms of the heaven. And these are the keys we need to not know, but use. It's just like with any locked door. You have to get the key out, you have to find the right key, you have to put it in, you have to turn it to open the door. Same thing with the gates to the kingdom of heavens. We use these keys. As I said, concentration, observation, introspection, meditation, but it's the right kind of meditation. There's a lot of dangerous ones out there, and there's way more of those, way more meditations that just lead nowhere than are beneficial. So we want to pick kitchen-tested recipes kind of thing. We want meditations where the masters have given them because they work. And they've worked for, thousands of years, some of the ones we're doing. So we have to use these keys. And it's not like you use them in different orders, and some seem like they're very close to each other. We have contemplation, and a good contemplation can lead into a great meditation, or vice versa. You can be meditating very good, and you'll come to this thought, and you'll start contemplating that thought, and you go into a great, deep contemplation. So out of all of them, visualization was stressed the most, because visualization means having. Having what? Having what you put in your mind in this world and the next world. Now, here's where everybody knows that movie, The Secret. Oh, great secret, the law of attraction. They didn't tell you about the other side of that law. Yes, that's the law of attraction. It's really not a secret. It's been known for a long time. There's lots of people who have spoken about it for centuries. But they've coined that term for the saying and saying, oh, if you visualize and focus, you can get what you want. True. But sometimes what we want become great obstacles in our spiritual unfoldment. So we have to use reason. Once again, we have to use reason to determine whether what we're expressing here is really what we should be expressing, what we're desiring, what we're trying to attract into our life. Is that really the right thing? Does that thing really align with our stated goal, our stated direction in our spiritual path? So it takes a lot of study, but it's definitely doable, and the rewards are great. The rewards of freedom. Everyone deserves to be free. Now, somebody Evers here is asking about to give names to the 12 faces of egoism. Some say there's 10 faces of egoism. Dasklos said 12. And the reason that there's that kind of conflict is because only 10 of them you do while incarnated. So it's the first ones we worry about. So they are the 12 stations on the path 10 to 8 on the symbol of life, which is on the right-hand side of the symbol, as if you're holding the symbol. And the first one is the most important one, really, of all of them, because you can't if you don't get rid of this one, you're not going to go any further. And that is the lion of Nemea, according to the myth of Hercules, which was of just a ferocious lion who was terrorizing people. And so Hercules, being a demigod, was given the assignment to go and kill it. And this is the problem in life. We have anger. Everyone feels anger. Things make people angry. What you do next makes all the difference in the world. There's a lot of bad advice saying we should express our anger. We should, take a baseball bat and beat our pillows on the bed at night to release our anger. Nothing more foolish. Nothing. Not only does it put a bunch of negative elementals in the pillows you're going to sleep on, but it just strengthens the expression of anger. Of course, stuffing anger, you're eventually going to blow up. So that's not the way either. So we can't express it, we can't stuff it. What can we do? We have to de-energize it. How do you de-energize it? Well, in the myth, the reason they put these things in myth is because people couldn't read and write back in the great, most people couldn't read and write. So they gave myths and stories to convey the teachings, the principles of the teaching in a story form. So in this form, and this particular story about Hercules fighting this lion, he tries stabbing it, but it doesn't work because its hide is too thick. He tries throwing spears. It doesn't work. His hide is too thick. So he eventually realizes the only thing he can do is to grab it around the neck and strangle it. Now, maybe that sounds violent, killing and all that, but this is a symbol. It's not, we're not killing anything, you know, some animal or something really. It's symbolic. And the symbol is we have to deprive the life force from the anger elemental, from the anger, let's say it like that. And symbolically, Hercules is cutting off the air to the lion, which kills it. In our practice, we cut off the energy of it, the energy of our attention, which is like air to it. It's feeding it, keeping it alive. So instead of energizing that anger or fighting against it and trying to shove it down, we lose interest in it. We convince ourselves we don't want to express this. We don't want to energize this. We want this to come down in our life. We don't need anger. I remember one time Daskos was telling a story, and as he liked to do in the Stoa lessons, and he said, you know, some guy came the other day and he tried to get me into an argument. And he was trying to just get me to argue back with him. And I said, oh, I'm too lazy to fight. And that's a great way to think about it. We should just be we're too lazy to take out the trash, but why not be too lazy to express anger? Wouldn't that be better? That way it'd give us a chance to vent our laziness, but in a proper way that would do us some good. The next one is the Hydra, which is a thick-bodied snake with, depending on the myth, 7 to 9 heads. And every time you cut a head off, 2 more pop up. That's and this represents unbridled desires. Not all desires. We're never going to get rid of all desires, but these unreasonable desires that's causing this problem, we need to eliminate. So Hercules cuts the head off, and then 2 more heads grow back. So he eventually realizes he has to take a flaming torch and stick it down the neck after he cuts the head off, and it cauterizes the wound, and then no more heads come out. The boar represents the material body, and so Hercules doesn't kill it, but he has to confine it, get it back to where it belongs. And this is just simply, you know, we can't really progress spiritually if we're gluttons or drunkards and we let the body urges take all control of us. That's what that means. And then the next one, and I'm going to stop with this one because there's a lot of them, of course, is the Syrian hind. This is like a wild deer that lives in the forest. And it's much harder to take care of than the other 3 labors, much more difficult than the body, the boar. And the reason is, what it is, it's our personality. And our personality is always hopping here and there, going here, and the moment it thinks there, it's always moving, it's never steady. The inner self is always steady. The personality is always flitting from one thing to the other, like a deer in the woods. So Hercules has to chase it for weeks, I think, and before he finally gets it cornered and was able to, again, not kill it, but subdue it and bring it back into its proper place. We're not going to kill our personality. We're going to tame it and make it aligned with the inner self, make it obedient to the inner self. So you can find more of these in Daskos, The Symbol of Life book, and we'll probably, we will definitely be given more teachings on that in a seminar in the future. Another question is, if one is suffering from phobia of a certain type and creating an elemental to stop this issue is triggering, activating the person, is there something else one can do to take a step forward, or no, take a step toward creating a new healing elemental? Well, sure. You're sure. again, visualization is one of the most powerful tools we have. And in this case, the best is just to visualize yourself freed from the phobia. For example, if the phobia is I'm afraid to go outside of my house, first start visualizing going outside your house. See yourself outside your house. Start to create that. What you're doing is you're creating an elemental that's trying to manifest what you're visualizing. That's why it's so important to keep positive thoughts always, because whatever we're thinking and feeling tries to manifest in our life. So another thing you can do with this is also write down, it's part of this elemental creation, write down in big red letters and read it to yourself every night, something that counters the phobia. In this case, it could be, I feel free to go anywhere outside of my home. You have to create these customized for yourself, but I'm just giving you a simple example. You create the positive of what you want it to be and start energizing that. And the reason you read it to yourself at night is because at night, just before you go to sleep, there's only a short window there where the doors of the subconscious open. And so that programming, that auto-suggestion is absorbed into the subconsciousness better. And it helps to manifest the thing you're trying to auto-suggest to yourself. So it's a complete science, all these things. But if you start working it, the idea is we just want to use the opposite to counteract the thing we want to get rid of. And that's what you do in medicine sometimes too, is you give the opposite treatment. And it's for like when there's somebody's expressing hatred to you, somebody expressing hatred to you, you give the opposite vibration. You love them back. Where there's fighting, you try to bring in the vibration of peace. So we use the opposite vibration to try to solve these phobias and problems in life. Somebody's asking, these old gods seem like pools of collective power. Can people still tap into these gods? And if so, is that unhealthy? There are certain gods like Shiva in India. It's probably the longest standing, continually worshipped elemental god there is. And yes, you can tap into it and you can get benefit from it. But we're not looking for elemental gods. We're looking for the God, the source of all, the author of life, life itself. We don't need these elemental gods that were created thousands of years ago by people that didn't have what we have today, didn't have this level of teachings today. So we want the real, not the elemental gods. Somebody's asking, does the attainment of complete inner silence mean that we have eliminated egoism? Yes, it is. It does mean that. In fact, that's one of the great advantages of having silent time. But people don't realize it's not silent. Doesn't mean just not speaking. Silence means you don't hear thoughts and feelings coming up. If you can silence all that, then definitely you've eliminated the egotism. But if you just hold your mouth shut and you keep thinking thoughts and feeling feelings, that's egoism is still active. Okay, we're going to have an example of an appropriate meditation tonight. Aki is going to come in and give her divine umbilical cord meditation. Aki?
Hello, everyone. Now lecture is over. Just relax and make yourself comfortable and make a deep, good breath. Tonight, I would like to do the meditation called the Spark of Life, our divine umbilical cord. I'm going to start the instruction first and proceed into the exercise. Are you ready? The spark of life, our divine umbilical cord, instruction. Even though it is impossible, if a single radiation of our spirit soul could be destroyed, then entire universes and creations would be destroyed. Sometimes we may feel our life is meaningless, even on the pathway of seeking the truth. Sometimes we feel that we get lost and wonder if our life really has its value. But not a leaf fall from a tree by chance. None of us exist on earth by chance. Nothing happened by chance. Each one of us has different aims and values for existing on this planet. And each event has precious lesson behind it. Do you know that as a spirit soul, all of us are equal? The only difference, if a person is a great criminal or a great saint, is in their level of consciousness and the degree of the self-awareness. Each one of us is a precious, indispensable, shining pearl as a spirit soul without exception. This is the great truth about the human being. And there is a proof of it. Each one of us is given a spark of life in our heart. This great electromagnetic energy pulsation makes our heart beat. Where does this pulse, the spark, come from? In this exercise, we will feel our heartbeat and feel God in us. This spark within our heart is life. It has exactly same nature as God. Absolute life. We don't need to go very far to find God. We can find God in our heart. But there is important advice here. We never concentrate on our material heart directly. It harms heart and it creates heart problem, and also hinders the work of the Holy Spirit and the archangels there. Instead, we will gently feel the entire chest area and feel the pulse of life, which is the spark of life of our spirit soul in our body. Our heart beats are the divine umbilical cord, which connects us with the source of life, God in us. Then let's start now. Please close your eyes. Relax your material body. Slow down your emotions and thoughts. Now go into a space of silence and tranquility. Relax completely. Start to breathe rhythmically and consciously. Take your time. Prepare yourself with steady, patterned breathing. And be aware that you are breathing now. Now, place both of your hands on your heart center and try to feel your heartbeat. Just put your attention on the entire chest area and gently feel the beats of your heart. Breathe deeply. Even without focusing on the material heart organ, you can easily feel this beat, the pulse of your heart. This is the spark of life in you. You are living now. Your heart is beating, but you are not making this heart beat. What is this pulse? Why is your heart pulsating? Your heart is beating all the time, starting from when your body was in the womb of your mother, and will not stop until your last breath. Your material life began and continues to be maintained by this spark of life. Visualize that your heart center is connected to the source of the energy, the center of the universes, God. The silver cord gives you continuous and rhythmic spark of electromagnetic energy, the pulse in your heart center. It is your unbroken connection with the source of life, God. Feel the connection of your heart center with God. It is just like the umbilical cord which connects the embryo's navel with the mother's womb. This divine umbilical cord is connecting your heart center with God in you. The physical umbilical cord is cut and comes off when its purpose is over. But this divine umbilical cord lasts throughout your current incarnation. This cord is connecting you with God as life. It is an expression of divine love. For living in the worlds of existence, we need this cord. But after leaving the worlds of existence, we will no longer need it because we are divine life itself. Feel and see that you are always connected with God through the spark of life. No one can cut or harm your divine connection. So you are never abandoned. One end of this cord is the core of you now. The other end of the cord is your real self, God. God sends you life all the time through this cord of love. In this way, you live and exist here now in a human body. Keep this precious connection between you and God. This pulse descends from the manifested state of life and expresses itself in the condition of time and space. God is love, and love expressed becomes motion, movement, and vibration, the pulse of life, the spark of life. Every beat of your heart is the voice of God saying to you, I love you. Feel His love through the spark of life and send your love back to Him. You are not alone. You are always in the love of God. Divine love is streaming endlessly through your heart. Love God in you and express this love through you to people and to the world. slowly and gently come back to your present environment again. No matter how much suffering or isolated you feel, whenever you feel you get lost in your life, place your hand on your heart and feel this spark of life in you. Please remember that you are always connected to God through this divine umbilical cord. So you are never abandoned. Divine love is always in you. You are a precious spark of life. Amen.
Well, thank you, Aki. You can sit there. You can sit there. That's all right. Thank you, Aki. That was very beautiful. Next July, we're going to, this is coming July on the 21st, we're going to have another webinar. We're going to try to do them every month. And we wanted to start tonight with The Search Begins to kind of just frame this whole process that humankind is on. This great, great journey of life. We're all on it. From the beginning of the caveman to our time to times in the future. But I wanted to set this stage of where we begin. And next week, we're going to talk about the real crucial aims, what we're really looking at. Because we are on a journey, whether you've just now started or you've been on it for a long time, it's always good, always, to know where you're going. You got to know where you're going. It's a spiritual journey. You just don't throw yourself in the ocean of spirituality and think you're going to make progress. We have to have an objective. We have to know what it takes to get to where we're going, what that looks like. So next week, we're going to get into all that. But we're very glad you came tonight and look forward to seeing you next week.
Next month, we are going to do the meditation about the aim of the meditation.
I look forward to that. Okay.
Next month.
Next month. 30 days. We'll
Yes.
be back here. Okay. Good night, everybody. Sleep well.